right. I want to welcome everybody to the March 16th, 2023 meeting of the Seattle Design Commission. Our meetings are designed to meet updates to the Open Public Meeting Act, requiring in-person meetings and an online attendance component for commissioners and the public. Our meetings are recorded through WebEx to be posted later on our website. Our meeting agenda today, we have from 10 until 11:30 a presentation by the Office of the Waterfront on Bell Street improvements between Elliott and First. The action or summary, maybe better way to put it, will be led by Erica Bush. We have a break from 11:30 to 12:30, and there will be from 12:30 to 4:30 a commission training on equity principles by Equity Matters Northwest. That portion of the meeting will be in person only. So the team today will provide a briefing on their proposal, after which we'll have an opportunity for public comment. We allow up to 2 minutes of public comment per individual. After the presentation, each commissioner will ask clarifying questions. I think we'll start in the room and then go online. And then for discussion, we'll start online and then go in the room just to mix things up a little bit. And we will have a summary or some kind of statement. We were originally calling it an action, but based upon where the status of design is, I think it will be direction and input on the two options. With meeting minutes available in about a month. Again, WebEx allows the public to participate in real time. We do have an opportunity for public comment in the presentations, like I suggested. We'll monitor. We only have one member of the public today that's indicated that they're not interested in making public comment, but we'll make sure that we check before commission deliberation starts. Why don't we go ahead and start with introduction of commissioners in the room and then online, and then we'll have the design team introduce themselves before we turn it over to the presentation. Why don't we start clockwise with Elizabeth Connor? If you can make sure you indicate your role on the commission.
Hi, nice to see you in person. Elizabeth Connor, I'm the Artist Commissioner.
Morning, I'm Phoebe Bogert, Landscape Architect Commissioner.
Morning, Erica Bush, Urban Design Commissioner.
Ben Hiss, Architect Commissioner.
Matt Ellis, Architect Commissioner.
And for commissioners online, we'll start with Kevin.
Good morning, Kevin O'Neill. I'm the Transportation Planning Commissioner. Sorry I can't be there in person today.
And Pooja.
Hi there, I'm Pooja Shah, the Engineer Commissioner.
Jill.
Hi, I'm Jill Crary. I'm the at-large commissioner and the chair of the commission.
And finally, Molly.
I'm Molly Spitalnik. I'm the Get Engaged Commissioner and an urban designer, and I'm sorry that I wasn't able to join you all in the room today.
And I'm Michael Jenkins. I'm the director of the commission. And with that, I think if there's nothing else, we'll throw it to you, Therese.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm Therese Casper. I'm the project manager with the Office of the Waterfront. The last time I think I saw all of you, I was presenting on the Pike Pine project, which some of you may know is under construction. So go out there and see what's going on. Lots of exciting stuff. But I will turn it over to the rest of the team to introduce themselves.
Hello, I'm Ricarius Jeter, project manager from GGN. We're excited to work on Bell Street with the community.
I'm Bernie Alonso with GGN, landscape architect, collaborating with Ricarius on developing design ideas.
So I think just to give a little context before we get into the site analysis and our concept design, just to let you know sort of where we are, we have gone to 2 meetings with the Belltown Community Council, and we've had 2 online open houses, one of which is still going right now and is open until March 19th. And basically what we've been doing is getting input on different priorities for these 2 blocks of Bell. And now we're at the point where we've developed some concept based on that input and priorities, and we're getting more input on whether or not the concepts and the different elements of the concepts are in line with people's priorities, and you know, what do they like, what do they see, what are priorities based on what we're showing, what are things that are missing. I will say that, just sort of a separate issue but related, we are getting a lot of feedback about the desire to not have vehicles on the street. I do want to say that that was not something that we put out as an option. There already are changes that are planned. Right now, Bell is 2 ways on both blocks, and you'll see when we show the circulation map, Bell will be 1 way. Each section of Bell will be 1 way, but in different directions. So we feel that we're already significantly deprioritizing vehicles, but there does need to be a vehicle lane, even if it's only for local access only. So I think, some of the comments, and I know there was even a comment that came into the commission this morning that was forwarded to me. So I just want to let you know, we hear that, but it's, and it's something that we're looking at, but there are a lot of changes that are already planned to the street that are significantly deprioritizing vehicles. And then, as you'll see in our concepts, we're, prioritizing pedestrians and cyclists. So just want to kind of give that context, because it'll probably come up as we continue to discuss the options. So.
And you're a presenter with various, so you should just be able to share your screens.
About to do that, right? Yeah. Says I'm sharing, but do you all think? Wait. Okay, there it is.
It just took a minute.
The room had to take a pause.
Yeah. All right. Well, we can get started in here. As I mentioned, my name is Vicarious Teeter, and I'm working with Bernie to design some concepts with the community for Belltown on Bell Street. And, we used this presentation when we were meeting with the community to remind them that this was part of the larger central waterfront improvements. And Bell Street is that last leg, as you see to the far right of the screen. Bernie will jump into this.
Yeah, and we GGN started on the project, as some of you may or may not know, when there was a different framework for what the project might be. So reaching back actually to pre-COVID times, we interviewed for a place that was also potentially going to take on, was going to take on the portal site and be a neighborhood park. Subsequent to that, and with some delay then, there was a discussion and negotiation between the city and the Seattle Public Schools. And there's a city-owned parcel then that may become a school. While that decision is being made, and I think there's a 10 or longer year time clock on that, our project became fully focused on Bell Street from First to Elliott. And I think one of the things that we wanted to start our process with the community, not coming in with prescriptive design ideas in any regard, but wanting to hear from them, but also letting them know what we saw as things that resonated with us about the community, about the place, and about Belltown. So our basic theme is that every place is thick with small stories, which you all, of course, can read. But the idea there is that this place started with humans thousands of years ago, and there was an active indigenous population that transited from Elliott Bay through to Lake Union that would have gone through, in reality, more aligned with where they eventually built the portal, where there was a ravine. And so this is the beach side of that ravine. As we go upslope, and thinking about the modern context of our indigenous folks, we wanted to make sure that we acknowledged them, acknowledged the rich history that they have, and potentially be looking for ways to include that history and that present and future in our planning, as that resonated both with the existing residents of the Belltown community and indigenous folks. And from some of the discussions that did, and we can get into that a bit as we get into some of the design options and some of the design elements that may be brought forward. There was also the history of the viaduct itself, and there was a passionate group in Belltown who really wanted that sign bridge saved. It has been saved. It's in a yard that Office of the Waterfront, SDOT own. And we'll be looking at repurposing it and resiting it on the property, within the project. There's also a great history of activism and a lot of great things. Sorry, this slide actually is showing some stuff that was still standing and still up for activism at the time we did the original presentation, but a wonderful scale and history of community activism and involvement in shaping the future of the neighborhood and the community. And we really wanted to build on that. There was a scale, a residential scale, a very local human scaled presence of people in this space. And we always wanted to reach back to and recognize that. Next slide, again, folding in the activism and the community scale and the community involvement. You know, one of the first pea patches in the city right there in Belltown. The Pike Place market wouldn't still exist. And GGN's offices are right on the threshold between the Pike Place market neighborhood and Belltown proper. They're at the Terminal Sales Building. Taking advantage of the fact that we're on the bluff side looking down, but really wanting to come back to the opportunities to connect the neighborhood to the waterfront. And as it's turned out, as we've heard from the community, it's also very important that they feel seen and they are connected to the activities that are on the waterfront. They feel that that's critical to the vibrancy of the neighborhood and the commercial success in the neighborhood, and to rebalance the sort of street daytime and nighttime activities that occur in the neighborhood. So really building on that connection. And then we see the opportunity basically wherever we work, but particularly in these urban sites, that the value of even very small portions of land being populated with native plants, really supporting indigenous and native wildlife. Birds rely on specific food, generally also specific insects, and insects have relationships with their plants. It's a very complex ecosystem, and we've seen success at the Meadow project we did at the Burke Museum and at the Gates Foundation, where even very small, relatively small patches have brought back invertebrates that you just don't see in an urban context very often. I know this not because I can identify all of these invertebrates, but because in the case of the Gates Foundation Meadow, they've continued the relationship with a person, Eric Lee Motter from the Xerxes Society, who actually continues to go out and do invertebrate census based, and he's able to see things, and then birds that rely on those bugs just coming back, and it's a wonderful opportunity. I'll pass. I guess I have two more slides here, maybe just one. There are other connection opportunities here too. There's the direct connection, but there's how does that direct connection fit into some of the existing programs, and where are the priorities for that? These two blocks, well, particularly the block between Western and First, is on the already developed and evolving Market to Mohi connection. And there are other connections real close in the neighborhood. We brought that. Just wanted to remind everyone that we can look at two blocks in isolation, but we would never want to lose the context and the possibility of larger connections.
So I would jump into like site overview. And so when we were meeting with the community, we just tried to really orient them to why we are here today. And we talked about the history of the Alaskan Way Viaduct and how that in a way separated the neighborhood from the waterfront. And so we were working, the work that's ongoing with the waterfront is working to improve that relationship down the hill to the water. And as we can see today, the new Elliott Way comes and meets Western Avenue at Bell Street, and it kind of forms this, it creates this opportunity to really make that intersection special. As if you're standing down towards, further south, you can, see that vantage point up and through into the neighborhood. And so looking down Bell Street, you see it's a lot more open. We have a little more of an invitation down to the water and Bell Harbor Bridge. And so we shared this aerial with this bird's eye view of some of the progress that was current 2 months ago. There's a lot more construction that's been done since. But we were, ultimately using this diagram to show what the scope of the project was and what was within it, what we were looking to improve. And so the first thing we did was we oriented everyone to the circulation that is present today, because there is with the scope of the project, there is some realignment happening in terms of like where cars can go and turn. I could go through this diagram, but I'm sure a lot of you may know. But ultimately, this is a two-way circulation for vehicles. And as Therese mentioned earlier, is turning into one way to feed Western, which we'll diagram in a moment.
In addition to being two-way traffic, the right-of-way is also two sides of street parking. So we've got all of that curb-to-curb dedicated to cars.
And so, existing circulation, there's good sidewalks on both sides of the street, crossings. There's some existing bike infrastructure, whether there are buffered bike lanes, shared roads with shared streets, or off-street bike facilities, which we're referring to as the Bell Harbor Pedestrian Bridge, just showing the biking options within the neighborhood in the context of this street, and just how that combines, just showing all those different circulations working together. And as we were mentioning earlier, Bell Street is turning into a one-way street to feed Western, which is a couplet to feed into Battery. Still has circulation and, went the wrong way. And we were looking at how this project could improve on or continue to add to the bike network. And there's that combined overlay. In this next diagram, sorry about that. The keys up there.
Oh, doesn't want to show it.
Yeah, maybe I need to be paid. I think it's a heavy diagram. So this diagram shows just more of the circulation and how, as I was just mentioning earlier, Bell Street is feeding into a couplet to feed Battery, which is also one way, and just more neighborhood context of circulation.
Can we just add one more thing to that?
Sure.
So Bell and Battery are couplets, and Western and Elliott are couplets. So there's a lot of couplets, going on in the neighborhood. So I think this kind of bigger view of the vehicle circulation is important because there's a lot that's changing south of Bell Street, as you know, with the construction that's underway right now. And so there's going to be a lot of change once everything reopens.
Well, it's going to add one more to that note there. Just keep your eye on the space, the open space that's on the right. Well, it's on the east side of the triangle shaped building. Our design proposals want to take advantage of the fact that there's 120 kVA Seattle City Light line there. That will keep that from being a future development site. Karis will get into the development potentials around here, but if you haven't walked this transect in a while, even if you think you're familiar with this area of Belltown, with the viaduct down, with the portal tunnel bridge in, and all of this stuff starting to come together, it is so fundamentally different than it has been. It's really hard to understand. That's why we tried with the aerials, and we're trying. I recall actually when I was on the design commission, a lot of debate and a lot of discussion just trying to figure out how does this X actually work and what will it mean. So if as we get into clarifying questions, if any of this seems confusing, don't worry about it. It is, and we're happy to try and clarify anything as we go through it.
Thanks, Bernie. A few site considerations. We just let the community we let them know about how the neighborhood is zoned. So it's downtown mixed residential, commercial, 95 and 75. So commercial can get up to 95, everything else is 75. And we also made them aware of the potential for some of the adjacent properties to be redeveloped. This box right here represents a current parking lot. In addition to this right here is a parking lot. This is a mix between a parking lot and a vacant building, or a building that is for sale rather.
Pause there. I want to point out one other thing. So on that, Therese noted that there would at least need to be local traffic on these two blocks. The reason we understand the need for local traffic is you have existing buildings that have existing driveways that feed onto that. They wouldn't have ways of exiting their parking, their underground parking without allowing the traffic on it. And then from an urban design perspective, we wouldn't want to see the alleys dead-ended. We want to see the alleys continue to be part of the functional street. And that's true on both blocks.
And then we just also reminded the community that there is this traffic plan that the city owns that is being studied to determine if Seattle Public Schools can build a school there.
I'm sorry, where's that?
I'm sorry, it's this wedge straight right here.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which is basically the tunnel lid.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. We wanted the community to just take into account the rare mature street trees that Bell Street has here. There aren't many streets in Belltown or downtown Seattle that have this quality of street trees. And so that was something that we thought the project would want to protect. In addition to the pedestrian level street lighting, not many streets have that. As Bernie mentioned earlier, the historic sign bridge structure, looking into how we can incorporate that onto the site via a gateway into Belltown to help pull pedestrians from the waterfront to go into Belltown and explore more about it. We also reminded the community of how the street is designated. So it's downtown neighborhood access, non-arterial, which sets the widths of sidewalk, furnishing zones, flex zones. And we used a few sections to help illustrate what we were trying to achieve. And so today Bell Street has a 66-foot right-of-way, which parking on both sides of the street and a two-way street. And we're looking to reduce parking and a travel lane. And so we showed them that you could get 20 foot of additional space if we did those improvements. And if you remove parking from both sides of the street and left the travel lane, you could get about 26 feet of improvements. And so the community really liked that. Obviously, they wanted to see no cars on the street. But the options that we studied were a combination between what you see on the screen here and this one.
I just want to say, not everyone wants no
Yeah,
cars.
not
I think we are hearing that really strongly.
Yeah.
So it's good to recognize that, but we also do have people, including some of the people who live on the street that were at the Belltown Community Council meeting, that want to make sure they can get out of their, parking garages and also allow for some load unload on the street. So yeah, I would say we're definitely getting a lot of desire for less room for vehicles, but there's also a recognition that there does need to be some circulation on the street for vehicles.
That's right. And so this was some of the feedback that we heard from our first engagement event. We received over 500 responses to the survey, and around 50 people attended in person. And we heard a lot of people wanting us to prioritize pedestrians and cyclists, create a safe, clean, and enjoyable space for people to gather and linger, make an accessible and clear pathway for residents and tourists to travel between Belltown and the waterfront. And there were some, we mentioned what the budget was, and there were some concerns about fitting on that scope within the budget that we have. And just a general breakdown of, most folks, about 70% of people walk or, use scooters and roll, 25% bikes, and 5% drives. And so just to have a point of comparison, we are showing Bell Street today, as you can see. 6 foot wide right away, so there's parking on both sides of the street and two-way traffic. And our first option looks at creating these community rooms, and we're using hierarchy in where we think we should have like visually dispersed seating versus community gathered seating, because we did hear a lot of people talk about how do we keep the street safe, and which is an honest question that you will hear in a lot of these types of meetings. And it's all about activation, getting people on the street and, you know, being present. And so we create these opportunities for seating. And at the intersection, we're trying to really celebrate what that could be by having the, you know, the larger gestures with seating. As Bernie mentioned earlier, you have really nice views southwest towards the stadium district. You see the Great Wheel, you see the ferries, you see the ferries coming in, and on a really clear day, you can see Mount Rainier. And so we think this intersection is a great opportunity to have like great community gathering. And it's also a general location of where we are showing the historic sign bridge. Obviously, that would need to be exactly located, but in terms of concept, we think that intersection could be like a great room, if you will. And just jumping into a larger scale, we're playing with, so, you know, we can't really play with grade because it is a street. The sidewalks need to follow the street to maintain accessibility. So we're playing with material changes. We don't have those materials defined yet, but you can see how we're looking into creating this enhanced pedestrian zone where you see the cooler gray right here. The warmer gray is, you know, your typical standard sidewalk paving treatment. And then the brown is another type of material that really forming those spaces. As you can see in the section below, the orange represents some type of larger community gathering plant. Don't know what that looks like yet. We're just, you know, showing it as an object. We'll get to the detailing of that later. And the individual seating, because that, you know, that's really a great opportunity to sit and make those views towards the southwest. This concept also, the biggest part that I missed, it also looks at bike improvements. And so between First and Western, if I jump back, between First and Western, cyclists would share the street with the cars. And then once they got to the stop sign at Western, they would transition into a protected bike lane on the north side of the street. So you follow my cursor. And then the bike facility on the bottom side of the street is meant to be an uphill climbing lane. So separating cars and cyclists, since it is a steeper hill, cyclists need a little more time to get up it.
Yeah, and just as a reminder, from First to Western is downhill one way, and from Elliott to Western is uphill one way. So that's we see a climbing lane is necessary, and then functionally working with SDOT cycle experts located the downhill segment for that second segment across the street on the north side. In that instance, we have another option as well. And one other thing, while we're talking about the steepness of the streets, we heard regularly from folks, this isn't the steepest street in Belltown, but it's also not the flattest. And as a connecting street to the waterfront, there was a group of folks that really wanted us to focus on design for the elderly. As Ricarius said, it's not really within the scope of the project to regrade it to, you know, modern ADA standards. But what they asked for were moments to rest, which explains some of the seating up and down the slopes, and also to integrate handrails. And that'll be common to any of our design solutions, but we haven't gotten to the point of detailing those. I just wanted to highlight that.
Yeah, thanks for that clarification. And this option also shows a planted buffer between the bike lane and the street. And we intentionally, you'll see it in the next option, but we intentionally left it off the second one just to see how the community valued a planted buffer versus a raised buffer. And so here are a few sections just showing that street. As Bernie, I don't think Bernie mentioned it, but I'll mention it. Between Western and First, the average slope is 6% downhill, and between Western and Elliott, it's about a 4% slope. So it isn't the steepest, but it also isn't the flattest. So we do have to be strategic of how we place seating so that it's usable. And here's a view of towards the water. As you can see, there's the protected bike lane. You can see the enhanced pedestrian zones. We're really trying to give a lot of space back to pedestrians and allow opportunities for them to gather and rest if needed along what would be a more or a less traveled street for cars, because we're reducing travel widths.
Precarious in that option, and you can see it in this plan.
Yeah.
Another element that's common to the overall, well, to both solutions, is that there, as Precarious noted, there's really great street tree canopy here. They're healthy, they're existing street trees, they're mature, there's plenty of room to program under them. One of the opportunities that we're exploring is actually just simply removing more of the pavement around those street trees to create more planted area, more area for plants. In suggesting that, people in the community generally like that. They were also concerned that that could be a convenient place for some of the similar crime problems that they see on the rest of the Belltown streets between First and Fifth. So they've asked us to be strategic about that and to keep the planting heights low. But we still think it's worth the investment to improve the base, the landscape around the base of those trees.
And as you can see in this view here, and you may remember that there was parking on both sides of the street, but we reduced all of that except for this one location here. And we wanted to leave that there to provide drop off for, adjacent buildings, whether they're loading or unloading. But we also wanted to like future proof the site. So like once there are improvements to the vacant land to the north, whether it's a school or a park, there isn't much work that's being done to like destruct this or demo it. And it also offers a staging opportunity for future construction. And we also did hear from the community where while they didn't want us to prioritize pedestrians and cyclists, we also need to be mindful that the Oregonian uses the drop-off as a loading zone. And so we need to be mindful of that with the designs. So that's what this drop-off is providing. Here's an axon view just showing the general street concept. As you can see here, we're really excited about this intersection opportunity. It is the flattest area of the site to have seating, have gathering moments. And it also has the greatest views towards the water, and also it has a great opportunity to really connect to the future improvements, whether it's a school or a park. And here's a view from the Bell Harbor pedestrian bridge. As you look your way up, you see a very strong civic gesture of seating and just enhanced pedestrian opportunities that kind of pulls you more into the neighborhood versus just looking at parking, we think. And so we also bias the improvements to the south side of the street because of the Bell Harbor Bridge, just trying to make that connection, but also thinking with future improvements to the north side, it may, we were trying to create a design that maximized what we could do with the dollars that we have, and just thought if we focused most of the improvements to the south, it would be a strategic option or a strategic move to just maximize those dollars. And here's a hand sketch of that community gathering room at the intersection. Just really highlighting that historic sign bridge. When we were meeting with the community, they were pretty excited that we were showing this. There's enthusiasm about, oh, can we light it? Can we put a big sign on it that says, "Welcome to Belltown"? Because a lot of what we heard from some of the business owners was, how do we pull people from the cruise ships into Belltown, come to our shops, come to our restaurants? How do we create an invitation? And a lot of that this project will work with the waterfront to continue that wayfinding, the signage program that exists. So we think some of that will also help people move up the street into Belltown. The second option is called Garden Pockets, and we're calling it that because there's a lot more planted areas and we're creating these little nooks and crannies for, shouldn't call it crannies, but just more nooks for gathering to happen. And we asked the community if they prefer like individual seating or like more social seating. We have some data at the back of this presentation that says that they prefer a mix of both. And then we also heard some comments from the community meetings about, well, they were asking why did we put all the intention on the southern side of the street, and that most of them walk along the northern edge. So that made me make an inference. Maybe we should do more seating also on the northern edge as well, just to kind of balance the two sides of the street. But we will look more into how we can achieve that. And so, as I mentioned earlier, we're keeping the drop off between First and Western, but the biggest difference here is that this is a two-way protected bike lane. And, you know, it wasn't a surprise when most of the community responded more positively to this one because they're more familiar with it. You know, they see it throughout the city. And so when we were asking them if you prefer the option more than the, like if you prefer this option more because of the design or because of the two-way bike lane, it was mostly because they preferred the two-way bike lane. And so, you know, we reminded them that we can interchange any of the elements between the two concepts, just based on what we hear. And so what we're doing here, instead of creating those like smaller seating zones, we're creating segments along those right away where we're doing a more special treatment to the paving, having more lush planting and seating around those existing trees. And then once we get into the intersection, the sign bridge just falls into more planting to just really play that up. And then here's a few more sections of that. So it's a 10-foot wide bike lane, and there's a 5-foot wide single-use travel lane. And here are some of those views will look like. And yeah, I think this view when people are like, oh yeah, this makes, you know, I think this was like when they, you know, they understood how they would use this versus the other one. The Exxon view, a view from the Bell Harbor Bridge, and a view of that that central intersection zone. And so, just to recap, vehicles circulate one way on Bell to feed Western up to Battery as couplets. We are enhancing pedestrian circulation. So in option one, the southern edge of Bell Street, one could walk along the building face or along the bike lane face. So we're increasing that circulation. And then in option two, since we're widening the bike lane and widening the planting, the southern edge of the street only has walking along the building face, and then on the northern edge of the street, we kind of double that. So you can walk on either side of the trees and planting. This shows just a general increased pedestrian space that the options provide. And it's generally pretty much equal. As you can see in the option two, there's a lot more planting being offered, which was also a theme that we heard from the online open house, that they generally like to see more planting. But both options show an increased amount of planting, but option two just shows a lot more. Bike circulation, option one, we utilize share roads between First and Western, and then protected bike lane from Western to Elliott. And then from there, you can either turn left on Elliott to go towards Pike Place, or you can go straight across Bell Harbor Bridge and take the elevator down. And on the southern edge, you use that as an uphill climbing lane all the way up. And option two is just a two-way protected bike lane on the southern edge of the street. This diagram is showing seating. So we're showing small gatherings of seating because, you know, we were trying to figure out if people wanted individually dispersed seating or these larger seating moments where a lot of folks come together. And what we basically heard was a balance of both, or a mix of both rather. And just looking at the sun study, spring equinox, most of that sunlight is in the intersections, because there are no buildings and large trees blocking the sunlight. And that's pretty consistent. Well, it is consistent in both options because that's what the sun is doing. The sun doesn't really impact that. Our summer solstice, you can see a little more sunlight popping up on the northern edge of the street. And our winter solstice, the less amount of light, as we would assume. So summary, we paused here just to get a read on what the community was feeling. A lot of them felt like both options were prioritizing their priorities, or addressing their priorities. We did hear, as I mentioned, there was a stronger desire for the two-way protected bike lane. They understood that grading revisions aren't really feasible, not an option. They did want to, we asked if lighting seating was important or if lighting the sign bridge was important. And they mentioned that lighting seating was more important because it's tougher to install seating and then change your mind about adding lighting to it later versus the sign bridge. You can come back later and add lighting. What else did we hear? Well, we have a summary that says that. So next steps are finalize the exact location of the sign bridge, determine the feasibility to incorporate accent lighting, incorporate the wayfinding program that ties into Central Waterfront's program, finalize the artistic site furnishings, incorporate accent lighting, finalize handrails, hardscape materials, and plant selection. And then a few questions that we asked were, do you feel like these concepts reflect your priorities? Then we reminded them what we heard, more space for pedestrians and cyclists. Our concepts show bike lane options, whether it's a two-way protected bike lane or shared bike lane with planted buffer, the different seating configurations, gathering spaces, and additional greenery. And then we asked, was there anything missing from the concepts? And so what we've heard, so this was, we had our meeting with the community March 8th, and so we're still receiving feedback, but so far we've had 210 responses, and 50% feel as if their priorities are reflected. Majority of the comments that say they don't, majority of the comments that say their priorities aren't reflected are coming from those who feel like, let me read.
Oh, your battery's running low.
I can breeze through this. So majority of the comments say they don't want to have non-local cars on the right of way, on the road. So that contributes to the other 50% that says they feel like their priorities aren't reflected. Majority of the comments say they don't. I did this morning, so ignore that third bullet. 51% of people say they would like to see more pedestrians prioritized. 33.8% think the balance is good. 15% would like to see cyclists prioritized more. Majority of people want more greenery. 63% prefer a two-way bike lane. And people have great space for gathering. Highest at 3 out of 5 out of 1. Suggestions for what's missing: playground. Probably can't do that in the street. Interpretive signage, bike racks, accommodation for dogs, more lighting, handrails. We heard that there's too much impervious pavement, and folks wanted to see clearer options for scooters. And we think they mean like parking, the scooters that you can run. So our next steps was to present to you today, refine the concept based on feedback we received from you all, and as we continue to see feedback from the community. We will also be providing an update at a future community council briefing, which hasn't been scheduled yet, but we're thinking August. And then
I thought we were thinking June.
That's right, June. That's right. We thought August was too late.
They said August.
That's
I'm like,
right.
that's too late.
That's right.
June.
And we plan to reach final design in late 2023 and start construction next year. Thank you.
Thank you. Could you put up the comparison, maybe the
Yeah.
comparison of
That's
option
fine.
one versus option two that was at the
Yeah.
Infinita chart?
No, I brought it. I just plug it in. Oh, right there.
Jill, Erica, I was looking online, there are 3 people who are attending. It doesn't appear that they've indicated that they want to make comments. I didn't see a hand raised. Why don't we start with questions in the room, then questions for the commissioners online, and then we'll check back.
I know some of our project team is also online, so I don't know if you determined who our project team is versus public.
I think they're attending, yeah.
Okay.
So, but we'll check that just
Okay.
in case. We have until 11:30. Why don't we just start how we did with introduction? We'll start with Elizabeth. And walk through the room, and then we'll start with commissioners online.
Thank you for all that detail. I was interested in, I think you talked about artistic furnishings. I'm just wondering what the word artistic means in this case.
That's a really good question.
Just
Very fair.
caught my eye.
Yeah, that's an honest question. So, we heard a lot from the community that they want to see art. And, if with a budget of 3.3 million, that can be really challenged. And so we thought that the seating could, what's that? Oh, sorry, my laptop died. We thought that the seating could be playful in a way. And, when we were meeting with the council last go, in the community last go, Tom mentioned that, think about the seating at the sculpture park, how they're like those really funny eye-shaped things. And that is an artistic expression, but it's not, art. And so that's what we meant.
Is that something that you would, actually, this is kind of an overlapping question. I'm wondering how long your community involvement will occur, and is there something about seating? It seems like seating interests me because for so long, and especially in Belltown, seating has been, oh, don't go there, separate. And so I'm really thrilled personally and professionally that you're concentrating on seating, and I also think it's a challenge. It's a strong element of what you're up to. So is this something that the community could stay involved with going forward? Because there is a history of that in the neighborhood as well.
I'm not sure exactly what you mean when you say the community being involved going forward with the seating, but I think as we define, we'll get more specific about where the seating could go. And so, yes, I think that would be something we would definitely want to do in consultation with the community. I mean, we heard that same tension, at the Belltown Community Council. I think people want seating, but then all the seating got removed, between 1st and 5th because of what was happening. And so, and especially, as we're coming out of COVID and people are sort of out and about more, I think it's always a tension and something that we have to be strategic about and think about. But we don't want to not do it. So I don't think you will see as much seating as what is in the concepts. I think we put sort of all the opportunities on there, but I think, we will scale back and we'll be more strategic as we move forward with the design. But, once we've developed a concept and have advanced it a little bit, we will go back to the community, and then we'll probably, go back again, towards the final design. So that's our typical community involvement process.
So you are staying, this is going for, this is continuing then,
Yeah.
at least through final design,
Yeah.
maybe beyond.
Yeah, I'm sure, because once the seats are out there, we will hear from people if things aren't working.
Got it.
Right? And so I think it will be important that that we look at seating that can frankly be removable, so that if we have to, we can take it off temporarily if needed.
I think another thing that's sort of bubbling up as we hear from the community is really a focus on where there will be visibility of that seating. One of the challenges of going into a place where the viaduct crossed through almost all of those buildings that face the viaduct have blank walls. They don't look out. So we don't have eyes on the neighborhood. And because of the steepness of the streets, none of those buildings, other than the vehicle garage entries, really have, the rooms look down, but there's no in and out. There's no front door on Bell Street. So I think what's coalescing is really a focus on that strategy at the intersection of Western and Bell, where it does sort of table out the intersection design that the Central Waterfront project already did, helps extend the tabling at the intersection, which is why we've located sort of the larger community plinth. That and the views to the south, we're just expecting that to be such an attractive space that and the drive-bys you mentioned, Septed, just eyeballs on the space helps with the helps encourage the neighborhood gathering opportunities that we want and discourage some of the crime concerns that the neighbors came and told us they were really concerned about migrating downhill from the blocks between First and Fifth. So we're being really deliberate, and I think Therese is right on when some of the furniture may need to be removable, but other furniture may be built in and of a scale where whatever artistic furniture means can be developed and integrated.
That makes sense. Speaking of the plinth, the community plinth, so that orange rectangle is the plinth?
Yeah.
Okay, and how large is that?
It's about like a parklet size, so about
Okay.
the size of a parking space.
And did you consider other options for where that might be and where the sign might be, or is that where the community you've spoken with really wants it?
And internally, we thought that it also could make sense to move it right here, somewhere in there. You see my cursor?
Yeah.
Just because we want to put it in a location where there are views and interest to sit and relax. And so the sign bridge, yes, there was an exercise before we started on this project. A few community members with Belltown Community, the Community Council of Belltown United, one of the two, came together and looked at a few locations to see where it made sense to put the sign bridge. This is one of those locations.
I think it's the only one of the locations from that study that actually occurs on our project site. So
Yeah, and the other locations were on the new Elliott and West, like they were sort of in that triangle area, because one of the locations would have been like the original place on the viaduct where that sign bridge would have been.
Yeah.
But all of those options, were thrown out for various reasons. So at this point, this was kind of, the recommended location. I think one thing about the other side of the street is because there is that city light high voltage line. I don't know if that's feasible or not.
Right.
But so we do need to also be looking at the underground utilities, because we do have to do a foundation for the sign bridge. So that's why, it's not like this is where it's going to be. This is concept design. I always get nervous during concept design. People get very like, wait, that's where it's going to be. So yeah, we still need to do more feasibility analysis. But as far as a location on Bell Street, we feel like this intersection, based on the previous investigations and ideas, is the best location for it.
I have one more question that's related to all of this. Do you have demographics on whom you have corresponded with through community outreach? And Therese, you talked a little bit about what was missing very early on, and I'm wondering who might be missing. And
That is,
do you have some strategies?
That is a really good question. I haven't asked that question directly to the outreach group, but I know that in the first open house, we didn't ask for a lot of that, and the first online open house. And so I did ask in our second online open house, which is happening right now, I did ask for more of that information to be collected. But I haven't seen any analysis of that. So we can get back to you
Great.
what we've collected. But we also, the online open house closes on March 19th, so we still have more time. But we did go to the Belltown Art Walk that happened on Friday, and I think we had 50 people there that we spoke with. So we're definitely trying a lot of different ways to reach out to people. And you know, the Belltown Community Council has been gracious in letting us take over 2 of their meetings, and there's been, you know, 50 people at each of those meetings, and so we're definitely getting a lot of people in the neighborhood to give input. So, but I'll have to get back to you because I don't know what the breakdown is of all the, you know, where people live, who they are, you know, all of that. So
Great,
I'll let you know.
thanks. Phoebe?
All right, yeah, thank you. I think a lot of my questions that were kind of bubbling up either during the presentation or while Elizabeth was, you know, some of her questions I've already addressed those. So I think I can reserve for comments mainly, but I think I'd one step back just to the high level expression that you talked about in the beginning of the storytelling that's, you know, is kind of really trying to think about the waterfront and the scale of the city and how you're maybe talking back to the existing portal site. How have you started to see that be imbued in the design, and can it be imbued, or what are those ways to then go back to the community and where those people are missing and kind of start to tell the story? I think, you know, we kind of honed in very much at a, you know, a 2-block scale right now, and how can we kind of pull that back out and make it really special?
Yeah,
You know.
I want to say it was probably 3 weeks ago, we met with an Office of the Waterfront team. So we heard clearly from the community that some of those ideas did resonate. And when I say clearly, we heard from a few people who felt very strongly, and then we didn't hear a lot from a lot of other people. So I'm not sure how exactly to read that, other than I know there was passion for it. Connecting back to the history and thinking more deeply about the history, the Office of the Waterfront has a very deep interpretive program. We've only begun to really start having an opportunity to, we met briefly with Rory Ampolsky, who I think is leading that program. So the short answer is don't know yet, to be determined, but we want to be able to do that and figure out what are the right stories and threads to tell here and how to integrate them. And I think at this stage, what we're looking for is to be certain we're not precluding anything, any further integration and more deeply woven pieces of the story.
Yeah, I think we'll move on.
Okay.
Thank you guys so much. So I had a few just sort of general questions that others may bring up, but just to clarify, was the reason that you didn't continue the curbless design from the Eastern design due to, was it a cost or was it more drainage complications with the slope?
I would say both. We have about 1.5 million for construction of 2 blocks. I don't know the cost for the other blocks off the top of my head, but they were right of way to right of way. So I would say many millions per block. So yeah, we never, well, I shouldn't say never. I mean, we intended these 2 blocks to be a connection, but exactly what a connection means obviously is to be determined. But I definitely think, given the grades, a curbless design would be very challenging. And yes, we don't have the funding for that. And frankly, you know, we've also heard a lot of concerns, you know, with the curbless design. I have to say, I rode my bike on Bell Street today and had some issues, which I won't get into. But I do ride that block a lot, or a few blocks. And it's definitely a challenge, you know. And you know, we are not, you know, we're not doing a Parks Boulevard. You know, we're not changing it over to Parks. I mean, there's just a lot of things that are very different about these 2 blocks. So yeah, the curbless design was not something that we were ever really exploring for those reasons and more.
Okay. And then with the planned areas, this might just be a greater detail than you guys are at this point, but I know there's a lot of challenges downtown with the maintenance of those spaces. Are you guys looking at like protections or elements that would be consistent with like bigger stretch of Bell Street, but would provide some barrier to those planting areas?
It's a really good question. We do think it's important to pay homage, if you will, to Bell Street between First and Fifth. You know, and there are a lot of right-of-way planters that are struggling. Some are at the cost of a lot of pet urine going into it. And so I think one consideration that we'll look into is how we can like create concentrated locations for pets to use, but also thinking of like the plant material that we use, making sure it's a robust and still beautiful plant that can survive there. We can look into like plant protection fencing. That's usually very expensive, and I'm not sure if the budget can accommodate that. But you know, we will definitely look into ways to help make sure that the planting is maintainable and will survive.
And then I just want to clarify with the coordination with the waterfronts overarching wayfinding plan, are you guys envisioning signage being added to the historic archway, or it's staying within its historical, like just simplistic structure?
In terms of the wayfinding, the desire there was more to have signs, you know, not on Bell Street, but, you know, down by the waterfront or Pike Place Market, indicating that people should come towards Belltown. Because as we discussed meeting with Rory, I think the signage, you know, stops at a certain point, like around where the Overlook Walk area is. And so, you know, we're looking at, you know, is there opportunity to maybe add a sign or two to help draw people to Bell Street? So that's one issue. And then the separate issue is, you know, frankly, we would need to look structurally about whether or not a sign could, you know, could be hung on the historic sign bridge. That was never, we never committed to that. We committed to the historic sign bridge, but obviously when you look at pictures of the historic sign bridge, it has signs on it. But we were concerned about committing to that because, you know, structurally, we just didn't know if we could, you know, we could make that work. The sign bridge, someone has described it to me that it's rusting. So I think that would have to be something that we would have to really look at in terms of feasibility. I also don't know, depending on where we put the sign bridge, I just don't know, because I've never, you know, put up that kind of structure before. I don't know what the requirements would be if there was going to be a sign on it. So that's kind of a separate, I guess I would put that in a different category than the wayfinding.
Okay, makes sense.
Yeah.
And then I'm curious, when you guys were thinking about the positioning of the seating, I guess I'm curious why it seems the groupings orient north-south instead of what seems appropriate for the views to orient.
I'm sorry, could you say that one more time?
Yeah, sorry. So it's seeming like, I mean, I know it's very conceptual right now, but the seating is oriented sort of towards the street or towards the sidewalk instead of positioning itself to align west, looking out towards the water, like as you walk down the slopes.
Well, so we're thinking that the seating are backless, and so you can sit on like whatever side you are, and so you can like orient yourself to whatever location you choose, if that makes sense. But in terms of like their placement, you know, for example, I see what you're saying, like in this option here. Yeah. So like how this is really oriented basically that direction and down the street. Yeah, I see what you're saying. That's a good question. I think that one was just trying to create like opportunities for folks to just like, you know, sit and gather. collect themselves as they're walking up the hill. There wasn't much regard to the bigger view down the street, but I do think that's an important one to think about. Yeah.
And then, sorry, one last question. I just want to clarify, so this signage placement that you guys have right now at Western I guess we had kind of questioned when we first looked at this design, the rationale for it to be centered versus an entryway into this 2-block area. And is that more of the technical challenges of the grade change at those 2 intersections, or is it because you really felt that the design intent is that would center that central gathering space?
When you say an entrance, are you saying an entrance at First or an entrance at Elliott?
Either, but I think more so at Elliott, that you would be entering into sort of this continuation of a Bell Street experience.
Yeah, and I guess, I mean, you guys can chime in, but I guess I would say, I don't see that there's just one entrance. Because if you look at that diagram where you have, I mean, part of it is there's streets that don't, well, they now exist. They've now been built and they'll be, opening soon. But that new connection on Elliott, has never existed. And if you walk down there today, that really feels like a grand entrance to Belltown, to me at least. So I hear what you're saying as far as it feeling like it's between, like it's mid, it's mid, block or mid, within the 2-block area. But I think if you're coming from Pike Place Market, that is actually where you will be coming. And I think there is a real desire from the community to draw people from Pike Place Market to Belltown. And that actually would be, Western Elliott, that new, roadway would be where people would be coming from. So I guess there's multiple entrances and multiple ways that people would be coming to the street.
That's
So
like the pedestrian
Right.
focused.
That would be all right.
that was gonna be your answer.
You can see there's a lot of new bike infrastructure that also goes past there. And it is an area where that side of the street, the foundations avoid the Seattle City Light, underground transmission line. And that's a more tabled area. When you go up to First, it does honestly present a great end view if you're on the other 5 blocks of Bell Street, and then the road breaks down away from you. But it's right at the edge of that precipice. The street and the sidewalks break down or fold down very quickly from that intersection. So as it moves even just a few feet, it's moving down at 6%, versus as we kind of pull it up from the Western intersection, it moves up in prominence. Part of this too is to get it to the right height so in addition to needing the vehicle access for the driveways and the alleys, emergency vehicles still have to be able to use Bell. And we need clearance over that, which I believe is 13.6 or 14. I'm sure we've got a civil engineer who can correct me on that precisely, but we need to get it high enough above the roadway there. And when we move down to Elliott and Bell, Elliott Avenue, not Elliott Way, Elliott Avenue, and it's another reason why we prioritized on the south side of the street for the pedestrians. Bell basically terminates in a pedestrian bridge or a garage entry. And we didn't want to be framing the garage entry at the bottom. So to Therese's point, coupled with the permanent open space that the transmission line creates and the views to the water, the visual connections, we think that siting, roughly that area of siting to be refined as we develop it, really provides the best sort of triangulation of pedestrian, longer distance sight lines and a community gathering space. And our instincts were supported by the conversation with the community when we were talking through both options and some alternates. Although I don't think any of us think that that's necessarily, that we won't have more discussion about where the sign bridge goes.
Thank you, that was.
Yeah, I was wondering, On the site that's city owned there, Bell and Western, are you aware, I know the city was exploring an opportunity for a K-8 school there at one.
No, it's still
It's still-
ongoing,
Still
yeah.
kind of, did you guys already?
It's a 10-year option that Seattle Public Schools has on the site.
Right, and I guess I was wondering if, how that's good enough, great, so you guys are aware of it and, how buses might interact with Bell Street.
We haven't designed bus circulation. What we've tried to do is not limit the possibilities that a future designer could figure out how bus circulation would work there.
Gotcha, yeah, and safety and all that kind of stuff. And then is the sign bridge an existing, did they save the existing thing? So you're just gonna clean it up, okay. And then, I guess, do you have any, I'm always a little bit skeptical of seating along streets because I don't know if I ever seen any in the city, you know? And I'm just kind of curious if you have any, data or experience that would sort of support a lot of seating. I know that the community thinks they like it, but it just seems like a lot of empty stuff. And then for myself, there's like even at the light rail stations, they're so often so dirty that I don't actually want to sit on them. You know? So I guess it's more of a I'd be curious to know if you guys had any thoughts on that or comments.
I turn to our
I think
experts here.
I think
Have
in
you
terms-
guys ever sit on seats along the streets?
I mean, if I'm walking and if I'm like gathering with people, I would say yes. I think in terms of like the street use and just what we heard from the community, I do think there's value in adding seating along the stretch. You know, one, I think it continues the existing relationship that First through Fifth used to have with the seating. But we also think that it gives you opportunities, especially at the intersection. We received comments from some of the community members saying they really enjoyed the view that right there at that transmission line of the mountain and of the Great Wheel. So they would really enjoy to be able to sit there and relax and like see that. And so I see people on in seating. I think if it's not maintained and if it's like dirty, yeah, that would discourage people from using it. But we chatted with the community just 2 weeks ago about how SDOT has hired more maintenance staff to help maintain some of their spaces. And so I'm confident that they'll be able to take care of it.
Just to clarify on that, the Office of the Waterfront has a maintenance program that is an enhancement of what is typical for the Seattle Department of Transportation. As usual, we never have enough money, but as the Office of the Waterfront, we are, doing projects that are an enhancement of what you would typically see with an SDOT project. So, we have money committed to that, but there's always a push-pull there. So don't want to overpromise on that, but it is something that is important to our program overall as the Office of the Waterfront. I mean, we are doing much more, public space and urban realm enhancements than just a typical functional transportation project. So I think, I guess, because as I mentioned earlier, I'm also the project manager for Pike Pine, and we are also adding seating along the Pike Pine corridor, especially as you go towards Capitol Hill because it's steeper and people need places to rest, and we did hear that as well from the community on these blocks because they are steep blocks as well. But it's just so hard. I was actually talking to someone recently, and we all go to other cities, and other cities have all of these things, and then we come back to Seattle and we don't have all of these things, and it's like, why can't we have nice things, right? And so I think it's a valid concern and question, and I think we're just trying to see what the interest is and what is something that we could do, but also not completely, ignoring, the issues. But, we should be able to sit out there and enjoy, all this new infrastructure and sign bridge and view and everything. So we're hopeful that we can, come to a solution that is a balance.
It's great, and I appreciate it. You got to start somewhere, and so it was more just the great answer. I had one kind of a little odd question. You said nooks and crannies, and then you said you shouldn't say crannies. And I was wondering what a cranny was.
Yeah, I think I've heard my grandmother say that word.
Muffins, muffins have nooks and crannies, right?
Yeah, I was wondering if I wasn't supposed to say that.
I think my reaction to it when he said that is, when we're talking about safety,
Yeah,
I think talking about nooks and crannies is probably not a good,
right,
framing.
Bad guys are in the next.
exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Anyway, thank you. I'm excited to see it develop. So.
I don't have any questions. I just reserve for comments.
Why don't we start with Kevin, then Pooja, then Jill, then Molly, and as we're wont to do, we're scheduled to end the meeting at 15 minutes, so brevity and clarity would be great.
I will be brief and clear. So I just have one question. Just a quick follow-up to the curbless question, because I had the same question. This might be a hard question to answer, but in terms of your public outreach, was there a strong preference to pull any design elements from the 5th to 1st section of Bell into this new section? Or do people in the community really see this as kind of a separate project or separate section?
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, we did hear one comment about the diagonal scoring in the pavement to pay that homage to what is happening between 1st and 5th Avenue, continuing that vocabulary down so that there's some continuity between the two. But I from my perspective, it does seem like the community understands that they are different in terms of, one is a lot more flat, and so it's more gathering, and the other is more steep, and so it's more circulation with opportunities for seating. So that's my take, Bernie.
Yeah, and I agree with what Ricarius just said, and I would say, I think like any test case or mock-up or model, what we heard a lot was pay attention to the lessons we've learned as a community from these first 5 blocks and do what you can to not repeat those. If we're gonna do seating, let's figure out a way that the seating can work but not encourage crime.
Yeah.
Figure out how the planting can support being lush and green, but also not support crime. They were really concerned about having to take out otherwise healthy plantings because people were stashing drugs in them as they were doing their deals there close to the 3rd. So we're not able to fully design out any behavior, but for everything we can learn from that first phase of the or those first developed blocks, we really do want to pay attention to the lessons learned.
Thank you. I'll defer the rest to comment.
Pooja?
Thanks for that presentation. I thought it was, it answered most of the questions that I thought I had at the beginning, so that was great. Ricarius, you mentioned at one point a planted buffer versus a raised buffer between the bike lanes and traffic. And I was wondering what you meant by the raised buffer.
Yeah, so it's basically a curb. So this bike lane is separated from the street by the curb.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's a curb in both options, but the curb is the only separation between bikes and traffic in option 2.
That's correct. And we can obviously tweak this to add planting to that outside edge between the bikes and cars. But we just want to see what the community value.
And on that point, and Pooja may be going here already, but moving a curb line for 2 blocks is a really expensive endeavor with all of the other elements that it would require. So until we've had a chance to more fully develop the budget and prioritize the budget. Yes, we could move the curb, but that may not be the highest priority for the budget.
Yeah.
What we heard really clearly was give us whatever and the best separation you can get between vehicles and the bike lane. And if that's a curb, then great, that can be the priority. But there are other ways to separate and provide protected bike lanes that be a better balance given the low volumes of traffic. This isn't Second Avenue, for example, where you have a full 3 feet dedicated to raised planters and all of the cones and all of the supplemental striping that's able to support. But I don't want to back away from being able to try and deliver this as a grade separated bike lane if possible. We just know that has a cost that we're going to need to evaluate.
I wasn't going there, Bernie.
Well, maybe I shouldn't answer questions that weren't asked then. But
No, thanks for the clarification. And I will defer the rest until the discussion. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Bridget. Jill?
So most of my questions about how you balance maintenance versus how much you can plant and how much furniture you can put out there have been answered. But in the interest of time, and because I have to leave to make the downtown our afternoon session, I do want to just try to tighten up questions and comments about the sign bridge. It's fantastic that you're bringing an old element back. You need old stuff as well as new shiny. I would push harder on the question of where is the entry to the waterfront? If it's at first because you can bring more maintenance and planting and quality, then why not have the sign there? I think you should think of the sign as a triumphal arch, and then it has a program element as well as a visual element. So that's it for me. Thank you. And I won't be here for the comment part.
Thanks, Jill. Molly?
All right, and I thank you for answering many of those questions throughout that period and for the great presentation. I will wrap outstanding questions in with the comment period. So I'll go ahead and defer.
Well, I think we can lap over 5 minutes, in the interest of making sure you get everything from the commission. I think we were going to flip from in-room to online, then online to in-room. We've got Erica poised to kind of lead us. I think when we talked about this, we also were like, this is input on option 1 and option 2, and anything that might be combined. So I think that might be where we start. Does that sound good for you?
Yeah, so so I guess my question is, do we want to talk about what we appreciate about both of the options? And then kind of go into the overall thoughts?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
That's a good way, I think, to organize it. Things about each that you think are important, and then kind of larger, kind of high-level statements. And maybe what we'll do is we'll get that going with Molly, then Pooja, then Kevin.
All right, fantastic. So I'll start with elements that I liked within both that I would want to see continued to be prioritized. I appreciate that there's the protected bike lane hill climb in both options. So whether one splits away in an option and it's in road is a Shero, I appreciate that the hill climb is consistently protected. I did appreciate the seating elements. I appreciated the playfulness of them. Also the mention of the removability and continued engagement with the community surrounding how seating is working. One recommendation with those, well, 2 recommendations with those would be to prioritize the visible locations for seating and to prioritize that seating being in solar access locations. So I appreciated the way that you created a story around that at the intersection with Western. So thinking about maintaining those as priorities wherever you really have visibility. You talked about some of the challenges with building frontages, blank facades. So really from a safety, visibility, and nice place to be perspective, continuing with visibility and solar as drivers for those seating locations. One other piece, so this is one of my questions wrapped into a request. So the design language, I was really curious about the clarity of the design language's relationship to the waterfront, to 1st through 5th, and to 5th through Denny. So just when we're next having conversations about it, and I'm sure it's useful to the community as well, just having clarity about where it's intending to relate to each of those from a design language perspective, and where it's intending to be a unique location related to the history of the viaduct or related to the signage would be really helpful to that storytelling of the connectivity between them and understanding about how to prioritize design elements in each of those. We saw the kind of arches in the streetscape as well in one of the options, and it would be helpful to understand how that's thought of in relationship to the surrounding areas. And then one other piece, Erica, are we doing condition recommendations within this section as well?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so I would ask that there be a condition, Therese, you mentioned readiness to come back with demographics from the engagement. I think that would be really helpful to how we understand how the community has been engaged.
All right, Molly, can you repeat that for my note taking?
Yes, the condition is reviewing the demographics of the people who have been engaged.
Thank you.
Thanks,
And that's
Molly.
it for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Molly. Kevin or Pooja? You unmuted first, so you get to go.
I didn't know it was a race. So I really thought that, it is an early design, but I think it was very thoughtfully done, and it's a comprehensive look at so many different things, from where the best place for the drop off is to, the foundations for this relocated sign. And I think you did a great job of addressing all of those things in both options. One of the things, and I think I am in the minority in terms of how I see the sign. I think it's great. I think we should definitely incorporate old elements into new design. But in the renderings that I saw that had the roadway section with the sign above it, maybe it's because I'm an engineer, I see that sign as something that goes over a highway, and it gave the street section kind of a highway feel to me. So I was trying to picture it without the overhead sign to get a feel for what it would look like without that. I don't know, but that, the community seemed to have a more positive outlook on that than I did. So take that for what it's worth. And one of the other things I was wondering is, if we could somehow look at stormwater treatment in the landscaping strip on the side, taking advantage of the slope of Bell Street and using that space for stormwater treatment might be something to consider.
Thanks, Pooja. Kevin?
So first of all, thank you for the presentation. It answered a lot of my questions coming in. And I also appreciate how complex this is, even though it's a fairly small section. I really appreciate the focus on pedestrians and cyclists. So I appreciate that being done in both design options and responding to the community. Plus, that's just what should be happening in this section. My comments are mostly focused on the bike connections, which are complicated, as you know, because there's so many one-way streets, both within this 2-block section and connecting to this section. Both, Bell from the east and then Elliott and Western are both one-way streets. So I think my comments are, first of all, with regard to, with all due respect to the community comments, I kind of preferred option 1 for the bike connection because it's more consistent with what's happening from the east on Bell, where you're going from a shared street to a shared street. If you go to a protected bike lane, then you're asking cyclists to make a transition at that point to a protected bike lane on the south side. So I guess my prevailing comment is that regardless of how the bike connection happens, the treatments at the intersections and turning movements are really important. So if you're asking cyclists to connect from Bell, where you're in street, east of First to the PBL, then how you design that intersection treatment so it's really clear is important. And similarly, the turning movements for bikes to either Elliott or Western is also going to be really important from a safety standpoint. So I would just like to make sure that the comments reflect that. I know that's a design detail that has to be completed, but I think just for safety and readability for cyclists, I think that's going to be really important in terms of how this gets done. So I'll stop there in the interest of time. Thanks.
Thanks, Caleb. Matt?
Okay, great. Thanks for the great presentation, by the way. I really like seeing two different options. I guess first couple logistical questions. I think I'm not a traffic engineer. I work with them, but I'm not one. I think it's unfortunate that we have two opposing vehicle traffic coming together, and I'm concerned about, well, how that traffic's going to be managed. And I'm guessing that there's going to be a lot of visual clutter that we're not seeing in the renderings to direct drivers to not proceed across Western. Do you know what I mean? So the big red "do not enter," or if it's I'm worried about how we're going to integrate that really vehicle dominant visual that's going to be required. Yeah, I know, I'm sure it's a done deal that those streets have to be opposing, but I think it's unfortunate. And somehow it's going to have a big impact. And I think you're doing a great job of pedestrianizing, supporting bicycle and pedestrian activity with some vehicle activities you have to have. I mean, I think that's clear, you have to have vehicle activity. I'm just concerned about how that intersection might get overwhelmed visually, because there's going to be drivers who are going to start heading the wrong direction. Yeah.
I will say quickly, without getting into all the design details, there is a neck down at the intersection, so there is only room for one vehicle.
Yeah.
So as a car, it would be difficult, and then also there's a new signal that's going
good.
on.
So the signal,
that.
that's good. And that'll probably have red arrows or green arrows only, or there'll be some way that this signal will help. You know, as opposed to just the big red and white. You know,
There's going to be stop signs on Bell, and then the signal will be on Western. So it's
It will be
going to be very different. Yeah, it'll be very different.
Yeah. I think it's just a challenge, but I'm sure that this just popped in my mind. I think the bike lanes are great. I mean, as an occasional bike commuter, what strikes me is how often, no matter how well they are designed, how often pedestrians wander into them, and you almost hit a pedestrian and almost have a major physical, crisis. I ride on the Westlake one a lot, and it's sort of curbless or blends into, and it's just it's often people on their phone, or I suspect it's often people who are new to the area who are visitors, and they're not aware, or they've never seen this before, and so we may be having some of that if in fact this becomes a draw for tourists or visitors from the market or from the cruise ships. So just, thinking about that, although hopefully it is going up, the bikes won't be going too fast. It might be going really fast down. And that's, so I don't know. I don't know whether the combined bike lane in option 2 or whether the separated bike lane in option 1 would better address that, but that's just a concern for development. And then I guess just in terms of design language or design character between option 1 and option 2, my sense is option 1 with this idea of trying to create the rooms, and I'm seeing the sort of gestural specialized pavement, the sort of crescent shapes, kind of feels like it's creating a space by kind of think of it as like the shape of a hand. I'm wondering if that feels a little bit foreign or a little bit, at first I was kind of into it, but then I started looking at option 2, and option 2 is kind of saying, this is a linear thing. It is a street. We're pedestrianizing it. We're making it really friendly. But it's still a linear space. And I feel like option 1, by creating these things, is trying to fight against that by trying to establish these rooms. And I'm just wondering if it's needed. It might be awesome enough, when all the details come together and the art and the seating, that option 2, which accepts the fact that this is still a linear movement space as opposed to
Mhm.
Boo. So that just occurred to me. But that's sort of a subjective design language. And then finally, I think the sign bridge is wonderful. It's really unusual because it's a piece of mid-century design, and its character, I think its curves, it's so different than a lot of the older infrastructure, like the riveted, built-up steel sections from from the bridges, and so it really has this almost kind of sleek mid-centuriness to it. I think it's great. I was really questioning its location, but then I kind of was imagining your discussion about how you're coming up from that open space, and it might actually
The
be
new
really
element
prominent
plate.
there. So I'm not really sure. I do think it's, maybe it doesn't have to hold signs. Maybe it is just a reimagination of this artifact, and it is maybe it doesn't have to do that much work, but it's more just about how does it look and feel, But I'm glad you're doing it, and I'm sure you have to do more studies about how it touches the ground and what happens all around it. But it's a great project. I'm glad to see it and really appreciate seeing the options.
Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, thank you.
Ben?
Yeah, so I'm gonna pick up on what Matt was just saying, because I was really intrigued with the gestural shapes and creating the rooms, and then the way that you just spoke about it, I thought was really interesting. And if you're creating spaces for people to stop, pause, and hang out, then I think some sort of gesture, whether there's arcs or some sort of paving, I think to me makes a lot of sense. But if it's really primarily more of a transportation to get from First to Elliott as a pedestrian or a cyclist, then I would kind of lean more towards option 2. And I think it's just about being really deliberate about what you want to have happen there. So kind of like the notion of these rooms. And whenever I see paving pattern changes, it always makes me think of something, okay, there's something going on here. There's this little bit of specialness. And I also am no traffic engineer either. I think it slows comms traffic down a little bit if you see some pavement patterns in the roadway. Not certain about that, somebody else can mention. But I think just being really deliberate about it. So if you're gonna create rooms, or if you're gonna have these shapes creating the spaces, that, how do people inhabit them and what do they need? Good. One little thing that I've noticed on this option 2, for the I think it's parking along between the Oregon Apartments and then the privately owned land there. There's a planting strip, and my wife really complains when she gets out of the car on the passenger side, or when I'm getting out of the car too. You step in mud or dog or whatever. So just having some place where you
The cut throughs.
yeah, cut through. It's like option 2 or
Option 1.
Option 1. I'm sorry, option 1 has that on there. So I think thinking about that if you're going to park there. And then my other thought is with the sign, picking up again on Matt's, I think it's really cool. I think it's the right place for the signage, whether it's on the First Avenue side or the Elliott. I think that makes sense to me because cars are both coming. And initially I thought that was a mistake that the cars were one way, both going towards it, but it's clear that that's deliberate and intentional. So I think that's the right spot, but I'm wondering if the seating should be, or the character of the lighting or the seating should have some sort of connection with the signage. So it's kind of a little bit of a district that has some character because it has the curves and it feels very mid-century modern kind of vibe to it. So maybe the lighting, the seating, all that kind of stuff can kind of touch on it in some way. And I think that'll obviously do it because I know we're short.
Thanks.
Really, I'm excited to see this happen. I have one more comment. I'm going to take it back. I have one more comment. I've cycled with my kids or bicycled with my kids a lot. And one thing I actually prefer the bike lane on the one side, but with my kids, they do not pay attention at all. They just weave their way around. And I'm just thinking if there's a school there, it could make more sense to have the separated bike lane. In that circumstance, and then I am the guy that Matt almost runs over in the bike lane. It's a really beautiful project. I'm excited for it.
Ironic to be told this.
Yes.
Sure, go Phoebe, Elizabeth, and have you close us out, Phoebe.
Sounds great. Let's see. I will start just saying, I actually saw, as opposed to juxtaposing the projects, I think I'll just kind of cut to what I think they share. That is really beneficial. So I think the seating, you expressed that there's probably more seating than will be able to happen per the budget, and then maybe that's actually viable. So I think kind of picking up on what you were just saying about the district, I think there is a true gem potentially there in terms of solar access and views, and that sense of openness that goes east-west, or the corridor that's east-west, but then also looking north-south to the new Elliott Way and to the open space. So I would really say that I would prioritize that intersection more so than I'm seeing it now. Like, I think that place can really be a place, and whether or not it has an arch or however that's expressed, I think that's really wants to build on each other, and that can be the part of the storytelling, that is part of the relationship to that sign, however it orients, whatever color it is, however the seating orchestrates there. But I think that's really where you're going to find your nexus, and then the next subsets of hierarchy maybe at Elliott and then at First, right? And I think, Jill mentioned looking at what the sign looked like on First. I do think that could be an interesting study, but also if you sit with that kind of importance at that particular Western and Bell intersection, I think that will just also really help clarify the designs. One of the things I did appreciate about the First design of having just the uphill climb, to the point of safety and crossings, that's a slower movement, right? So when you have the cycle track, people are going to be screaming down, and so it made sense to have the garden pockets. I do think that's problematic, the amount of planting and that kind of the interior focus of those seating pockets. So I think looking at that porosity across bike lane to pedestrian, and kind of opening up that space, that interstitial space in between the sidewalk and the street, is going to be important, and however you combine the designs. That's it.
Thank you.
When I was first looking at this, before you even arrived, I was wondering, what's the pace? What's the speed? Almost, is there a speed test for all these activities? And so I think what Phoebe just mentioned is, and possibly distinguishing between the elements of various designs, maybe that just doing that test, and maybe redoing that test with the neighborhood as well. It occurred to me, Bernie used the words "do not preclude," and Curious, I think you were talking about future proofing. And it occurred to me as you were talking about this project that you're creating space for continuing to think, especially at this point. But it seems like you're really open to this shifting in different ways and examining it. And so I just thought, I wonder if there's a way to experiment with some of these things. Throw some plastic chairs out there and see where people put them. It seems like you're making the time. You're making the time, and you don't have the budget, but you're also, you're generously making the time and the keeping an open mind about this. So maybe figuring out some very inexpensive ways to answer some questions about how people might use this. You had a great image of the community garden, the historic First community garden. I'm wondering if there's space for something like that, because I started to think, how is this community going to stay involved? How will the street stay safe? And having that kind of activity on the street, I think, may be a solution. It's a difficult solution, possibly, but and it may enter into the "every place is thick with small stories" title slide. Pooja's comment about stormwater. I just wrote down, how can you mitigate the slope and but also celebrate both water and slope? It seems like they have a relationship to each other, and it's something that's exceptional. It's really amazing how steep this is. And you also, one more thing, you also mentioned there being some unusual type of street lighting already in this district, this small district, and maybe just building on that really struck me that's something that already exists, that also relates to safety and a welcoming feel for small spaces. Thank you. I'm excited about this project too. Erica.
Yeah, agreed. I'm a big fan of all of the improvements that are happening connecting Waterfront into downtown. I am gonna like disagree a little bit with some of the thoughts that thinking about how that space functions, sort of to Bernie's mentions of like not having activated edges. I really lean into the opportunity that Pooja mentioned about stormwater infrastructure and art actually being something that we utilize more heavily in this space versus seating, because I think, so to Phoebe's mention, like I think drawing seating into a focused area where solar and views make a lot more sense instead of speckling seating throughout where there isn't cause for it necessarily, the same way there is in a dedicated sort of central focus that has better light and visibility and integration with that sign, which I think is such a cool element. I think it's actually kind of unnecessarily sort of bringing elements into the space that are just going to, I hate to say it, but become problematic. Like focusing more on the greenery and just the quality of that space versus seating in the rest of it, I think makes a lot more sense, so that you can really take the minimal financial investment that you have and make one space that works really, really well. So I think it has the opportunity to be a really cool connection between these spaces and really be a beautiful gateway. But I think being super realistic and focused about that placemaking capacity of that one intersection, instead of speckling maybe not so functional breadcrumbs throughout the space, makes more sense. And then I think we're good on time.
I think we are. I think, you know, initially we walked into this as being an action, but I think really it's a better use of the commission to do what they did today, which is to give you outlook on options. I think when you come back and bring the pieces together is when maybe we'll do something. So I think we can hold there and then just think about when you come back, and anxious to see how you balance all of the things that the commission has thrown at you today.
No, this was super helpful.
Good.
Thank you. I mean, we're, as we discussed, these are challenges that we're thinking about. And so it's great to get all of your professional, expertise and thoughts about it. So,
Thanks.
thank
It
you.
was very, very helpful. I think we'll leave it. I was going to defer to Jill, but she's in transit. So I think what we'll do is we'll just we'll pause there, and then Valerie will reach out to you when she's feeling better. And
Sorry.
we'll figure out what next steps look like in the timing.
Great. All right. Well,
Great.
thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone for all of the input. To the point that I think we all would have loved to have been at a position to ask for an action, but based on the timing with the community and necessarily then still having the open house open, it didn't feel right to synthesize something from the last round of feedback we got from them and artificially ask for an action. So I really appreciate you taking the time to give us the input. We can layer that in, and I think it'd be really useful. So thank you.
All right, well, at this point, I'm gonna stop the recording. We're gonna transition to